Hi, my name is Andrew and I read The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. So before I begin, I would like to give a quick summary of my book. This is Oscar, he's our main character. And it's not hard to deduce that The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde is about Oscar. It's a coming-of-age story for Oscar and his family, but the thing is, the title is a little bit misleading. Because Oscar is not wondrous at all. In fact, he's the opposite. He is fat, ugly, and weird. And the reason I bring up Oscar's characteristics isn't to criticize his appearance, but because it's important for my interpretation of the novel. So what did I think of The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde? Well, the sort of thesis I came up with was that people are quick to exile other people when they don't fit in with social expectations. Even if these people are chasing morally praiseworthy endeavors like pursuits and individualism. And when I say someone doesn't fit in, it's important to notice that I'm not only talking about interests, passions, and behavior. I'm talking about anything really that affects how other people perceive you. For Oscar and his family, it seems to be a combination of multiple factors. So before I go on, I have to explain a supernatural concept that comes back over and over again. It's the Fuku curse. People cursed with the Fuku curse are supposed to live a lifetime of torment. But for this presentation, although the characters in The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde often pin the Fuku curse as a source of their misfortunes, their challenges, and obstacles, I actually believe that the struggles that Oscar and his family face really have nothing to do with the supernatural at all. In fact, I believe that the Fuku curse is really just a manifestation of social prejudice against people who do not fit in with social expectations. And what I'm trying to say is that essentially Oscar, his family, and the other characters in the book suffer from a form of social elitism in one way or another. So how does social elitism appear throughout Oscar's life? Well, first, it's important to understand that Dominican culture places unrealistic expectations on Dominican men. For many, their intrinsic value is tied to their success with women, toxic masculinity, and hypersexuality is a huge part of Dominican identity, and many of these men try to play into a sort of playboy stereotype. Here's a quick Google search of Dominican men. And how this relates back to social elitism and the Fuku curse is that the thing is, for most people, these results are practically unattainable. And for Oscar, he is ostracized for not living up to these standards. Here's a quick quote that summarizes Oscar's experience in high school. He compares it to a medieval spectacle, being crucified by a mob, where the whole experience was needlessly devastating. And the reason I bring up Oscar's high school experience is because it illustrates how Oscar, and many of us really, have at least in one point in our lives been a victim of social discrimination because of our appearance. Oscar's interests and passions do not help Oscar's circumstances much either. The genres is a derogatory term used in the book to describe fiction and fantasy interests. And for Oscar loves the genres. It's a huge part of Oscar's identity. But Oscar is unlucky, through no fault of his own because of arbitrary social stigmas, like prejudice against people who enjoy certain activities. Oscar is pitted at the bottom of society. I put in a conversation between Oscar and his friend. Oscar defends the virtue of being yourself, but his friend rebukes by saying yourself sucks. I put this conversation in here because I believe that this encapsulates how terrible it feels trying to grow up and be yourself when being yourself is not always widely accepted by society. No, in other words, being yourself, according to the book, is not always a good thing. It being yourself doesn't align with what other people expect of you. So far, I've only talked about Oscar, but social elitism affects all characters within the book. For Oscar's mom, she grows up parentless. Her nearest relatives sell her off as a slave. She grows up in poverty. Oscar's grandfather was born during a merciless, ruthless dictatorship. Even Oscar's sister, who fares relatively well compared to the rest of her family, still suffers from an antagonistic relationship with her mother in a single-parent household. Like I said before, although these characters blame the Fuku curse as a source of their problems, it seems as if these issues derive from a more tangible, natural root causes. For my creative component, I wanted to use a little bit of math to show how unrealistic Dominican expectations are. For reference, the x-axis is attractiveness on a scale from 1 to 10, and the distribution curves represent the frequency for each appearance value. So the left graph is a distribution that we would expect to see. Many people would cluster around a 5, which is average. Some people would be between a 6 and an 8, and very rarely would we see anyone above a 9. And the opposite is also true. Oscar in this graph would be somewhere in the middle, not too far right, not too far left, maybe slightly to the left. But in any case, Oscar's appearance isn't unusual. It's something that we would expect to see. On the right graph, though, this is the distribution that I would imagine Dominicans would have towards their men. And what I hope to illustrate was that Dominican expectations are so inflated that it actually shifts the entire distributions a couple standard deviations to the right. So much so that it extends beyond what we would think is naturally attainable, and so much so that it completely displaces where Oscar fits in. On the right graph, Oscar doesn't even show up. I put a quote showing how Oscar was viewed by his peers. He wasn't someone that everyone was talking about. He wasn't a home run hitter. He wasn't a playboy. He was a nobody. The second part of my creative component has nothing to do with math at all. It's a triangle that represents core pillars for Dominican values: attractiveness, personality, and status. Very few people would possess all of these traits, but the edges help classify the type of individual you would be in a Dominican community. But these pillars are sort of arbitrary, because what's more important is to see where Oscar fits in the grand scheme of things. Like in the graph I showed earlier, Oscar doesn't appear on this diagram at all. He's in a section of his own, a section called the neighborhood Paraguayo. And this term actually originated during American occupation in the Dominican Republic during the 20th century. It was used by natives to insult American soldiers who they viewed as foreign invaders. And the irony is that even within his own ethnic group, Oscar is branded as an outsider, relegated to the same level as foreign invaders in his own country. So what's the moral of the brief wondrous life of Oscar Wilde? Well, Oscar dies at the end, and he dies horrifically. After being caught in an affair with a married woman, Oscar is beaten and killed by a gang in the field where his mother used to work as a slave. I think this is Junot Díaz's, the author's, way of a cyclical ending to the Fuku curse, but I always viewed it as how society has completely failed certain individuals. The fact that Oscar only experiences brief moments of happiness and fulfillment and is forced to endure an entire life of obstacle and tragedy, it falsifies as many popular messages that people love to preach today. Being yourself only works when you're socially elite. Lookism is a huge part of social discrimination. Society favors certain people and abandons others arbitrarily. I think that was the message of the brief wondrous life of Oscar Wilde. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.